He's Dave and I'm Dallas, and we have opinions on just about everything. Sometimes they're on point, and sometimes they go down better with a glass of wine. Join us. This is the Wine and Podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to Wine and, the show where we pair wine with movies, TV, music, comics, and today we are tackling our first book, full-blown novel. We are literate. Hooray! If you like what you hear today, please make sure to hit that follow or subscribe button. It does help the podcast grow and reach new listeners. If you love us, then please leave that 5-star review. Full 5 stars. Don't quibble. Don't equivocate. Not 4.5. Not 4. Come on, man. What are you doing to us? 5-star review. And if you don't love us, well, the Good Taste Police called and want to loan you some good taste. All right? Because we are a great show, in my humble opinion. Don't ask Dallas. He will actually probably tear us apart. He's like, we could be better. This is not the best show. I listen to better podcasts than this fucking thing. Anyway, you can also, I wanted to mention, find uncut, lengthier versions of these episodes along with articles on the intersection between entertainment and wine and I just posted, this is at our Substack, wineand.substack.com, and I just posted yesterday, at least when we were recording this, which is not when you're listening to it, of course, but yesterday before we started recording this, I posted a lengthy article on how 1992's Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, rescued his entire wine empire. That movie was so critical. It kind of rescued his production company, too. It rescued everything. He was on the brink of insolvency. It goes into the history of his career in the 70s, the 80s, and how he got to where he was at the beginning of the 90s and what happened with Bram Stoker's Dracula. Some of the behind-the-scenes quirkiness that was going on set. How it was a bit of a minor miracle, like all movies, that it got made, that it came out well, and how it did in the box office to be the lifeline that he desperately needed at that point in time, and how it rescued his entire wine empire and allowed him to grow it to where it is today. So you can find that entire article on our Substack, wineand.substack.com. That article is free for all to read. There will also be the uncut episodes are only for the paid subscribers who support the show, so please come support the show if you like it. And you will also find interactive polls, bonus pairings, and more, all on the Substack. It's the best place to interact with us. You can also shoot us an email, especially if you hate the show and have feedback and you're like, you guys suck and I know how to make it better. Great. Don't leave that review. Leave that review alone. Shoot us an email at wine, the letter N as in Nancy, POD as in podcast, winenpod@gmail.com. Shoot us that email. We will take it seriously. We will read the whole thing. We may not agree with everything you send us, but we will absolutely read it. All right, and take it into consideration. We may even read elements of it on the show if you have really good points and we're like, hey, let's talk about this. We might even read it and disagree with you on a few things, and we're going to discuss why we disagree, but we want you to know that you've been heard. Also, one last thing, if you're on your phone, when you're listening to this podcast, you can also send us a quote-unquote text. I shouldn't say quote-unquote. It is actually a text, but it's a special kind of text. You'll find a clickable link at the beginning of the description of this episode. It says, send us a text. It doesn't work as an active link on every single podcast platform when our RSS feed sends it out to all the platforms, but it does on most. And if it's clickable, click that if you're on your phone, and it opens up your text app, and send us a direct message via that, which shows up in our Buzzsprout inbox as a message. It does not show us your phone number, never fear. It only shows us your final 4 digits of your phone number, kind of like a credit card on a credit card receipt, right? It's just your final 4, and then it gives us your message. It's just a right here, right now, quick and easy way. Send us a quick note. We really do want to hear from you, even if you're tearing us a new one. We want to hear from you. It's okay. All right, folks. Today, our first novel, we are covering John Boynton, or J.B. Priestley's Benighted. That's night without a K. And yes, it's actually a word. Look it up. It is benighted, like night falls. Night befalls you, so you are then benighted in that context. I didn't actually know that was a word until I discovered this novel, but I love it. I think it's a great novel title. Benighted is the second novel by J.B. Priestley, Both his first and second were published in 1927. Yeah, we're going back, baby. Going back in time. This is not a new novel, but it has gotten new life just very recently. We're going to cover that here in just a moment. But both his first and second novel were published in 1927, so this was the beginning of his career. He did not hit it big with the public until his third novel, The Good Companions, which came out in 1929. Benighted was actually released in the US originally as The Old Dark House. And that title references how the novel is a deconstruction or summation of old dark house stories, a popular subgenre at the time, similar to how, Joss Whedon's Cabin in the Woods was named to be the same for that particular subgenre, the Cabin in the Woods subgenre. So old dark house stories typically involved a group of eclectic strangers gathering at an old dark house for, like a reading of a will, or because a bridge had been washed out by a storm, which is a little bit what happens here. There's a massive storm at night, and everyone is forced to take shelter in an old dark house. This was a subgenre that was extremely popular in the live theater of the 1920s, and then into the silent film, cinema, and even the quote-unquote talkies of the 1930s and 40s. To modern audiences, we all know and maybe love the ultimate parody of old dark house stories in the movie The Rocky Horror Picture Show, which was a parody of old dark house stories. So even if you've never really heard that subgenre or weren't really familiar with it, and honestly, I kind of was not either until I started digging into the background of this novel. But speaking of movies, Benighted is best known for its film adaptation in 1932, which was titled The Old Dark House, based on the American novel, or based on the American title of the novel, which that movie has been called, quote, the apotheosis of old dark house chillers, unquote, by William K. Everson in his 1974 book, Classics of the Horror Film. If you're in the States, the film is freely available to watch on Tubi, and I highly recommend it. Directed by James Whale, who directed the OG Boris Karloff Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, and Invisible Man. And Old Dark House also stars Boris Karloff, alongside James Whale regulars Ernest Thesiger, Lillian Bond, Eva Moore, and Gloria Stewart, and additional well-known actors Charles Laughton, who I love, Melvin Douglas, and Raymond Massey. The producers actually hysterically added a note to the opening credits of the film. That said, quote, producers note, Karloff, the mad butler in this production, is the same Karloff who created the part of the mechanical monster in Frankenstein. We explain this to settle all disputes in advance, even though such disputes are a tribute to his great versatility.
That's great. That's a good disclaimer. I like that.
Isn't that a good disclaimer? But the funny thing about that disclaimer is it goes to show that back in the day, this is before monster makeup was that really well understood or that much of a thing. So the movie makers were literally like, we need to tell people this is the same guy. They're not going to know. And it's funny because Hollywood still, we just talked about this, no. I talked about this in my Bram Stoker Dracula article, which is that Johnny Depp was up for a role in Bram Stoker's Dracula, and he had just done Edward Scissorhands. And the studio rejected him, saying he was not a big enough draw. And even after Edward Scissorhands, and the reason they said that is we think, anyway, no one's on record having said this, but Hollywood has long had a belief that if you're behind a lot of makeup of any kind, that the audience doesn't really know it's you. They don't know you as the actor. If you're there's too much, and nowadays it might even be CGI that you're behind, like some mix of practical and CGI effects to where you don't look like you really, like you're only a hint of you. And if that's your first big role or one of your biggest roles you've ever had, they're going to assume the audience has not figured out that you're the one there. So they don't give you credit for being a name from that. Now, they'll put you in makeup again
Right.
If they have need for another monster, awesome. Like Boris Karloff did that for a lot of his career in that way. So I feel like this is the beginning of Hollywood already getting into that mindset where they're like, look, this is the same guy. We know you don't know and can't tell the difference, but it's the same guy. And of course, to modern audiences, we're like, fuck off. Of course we know it's Boris. It's Boris fucking Karloff.
Right.
What are you talking about?
Right.
All right. So I also wanted to shout out one other actor in the movie, Brember Wills. You've probably never heard of him, and for good reason. He was a stage actor on the British scene and did precious few movies, like 2 or 3, I think, actual, like he had a role of any significant screen time. The Old Dark House being his most remembered. He plays a character who is essentially is the finale. He is the finale of the movie, and he's tremendous. Incredible physicality. Amazing performance. I cannot praise it enough. But apparently, because he was predominantly a stage actor, and this was his one and only real movie of significance, this is it. This is what modern audiences get of him. There's no other record. There's no other recording of him, to my knowledge. So watch this movie and check out Brember Wills at the very end, because damn, man, he's good.
And,
he's so good.
Real quick, guys, in case anyone is unclear of the sort of the genre of this book, let's give you some themes real quick here. It draws heavily on the Gothic horror conventions, of course. You've got, as Dave was saying, the haunted house, the sort of eccentric inhabitants. You get that atmospheric dread and mystery, the old dark house thing. I would say the most interesting version of that in the last 60 or 70 years is probably the Addams Family. A very similar sort of concept. Priestley wrote the novel
veering much more into comedy, of course.
Absolutely, 100%. But even with the comedy, the Gothic sort of horror elements are still there. That's just sort of a turn on the concept. This is Priestley has said in a few interviews that this novel is essentially...
hold on. I'm going to get there. Hold on. Don't jump the gun.
Wait, okay. All right. Okay.
All right. Don't jump the gun on what he said, because I know that quote you're about to pull up. And yes, we're gonna get to that quote in just a moment here. But I will say, yes, to Dallas's point, this is a Gothic drama thriller. It's a psychological drama more than a straight up horror movie. Some people have said book, a straight up horror story. Some people have said the movie veers more into comedy in many ways than the book ever does. I both do and don't agree with that. I think the last thing I'm going to say about the movie before getting back to the book is that the movie, and there are actually 2 adaptations of this film that have been made. They remade this film again very loosely in 1963. William Castle did an adaptation of the book as a comedy, a very black comedy, very modern, very different from the novel from what I can tell. That one's not that well regarded, whereas the 1932 one is. And maybe we'll do an episode where we do those 2 adaptations as a single episode, like just back to back, and do it as a sort of companion piece to this. So I don't want to say too much about the movies, but I will say this one thing. The movie's very short. I think it's like 70 minutes long or something of that nature. And it does not take time. It is like scene, onto the next beat. It's so fast and pitter patter that I can see why people are like, it's almost comedy. It's like, it's got the speed of comedy. And the book is short. It's about 150-ish pages.
Right.
And it is not a long novel whatsoever. By modern standards, you could almost call it a novella. But it does take its time, and it's got a lot of atmosphere and a lot of mood, and is thematically very dense. There's so much more happening in the novel that, film, you're not inside the heads of the characters, and the novel has no problem getting inside the heads of the characters. It's very in the heads of every single character. Every character gets his chance to shine. In the movie, characters do things and turn on a dime to behave certain ways that the movie takes no time to explain. And the ending does differ. While the novel contains a charming quality, it's darker, it's more brooding, and the movie did not have the balls to go as dark as the novel does in the finale. The movie pulls back quite a bit from that. The movie is more exciting in its way at the end, but the novel's ending is dark. It's electric in a very different way. Whereas the movie, it's very energetic. It's very intense. Whereas the novel, it's very intense in almost a Poe or H.P. Lovecraft way, where it's all anticipation. It's like just the dread of what's happening and what might happen. Anyway, the ending does differ. So if you've seen the movie, you have not experienced the end of the novel yet. I guarantee you that. So the novel will reward you with something different there. So quick coverage of who J.B. Priestley was before we get into this novel in specific. He was a British novelist, playwright, screenwriter, broadcaster, and social commentator. He wrote 26 novels, 20 plus plays, plus additional short story collections and nonfiction books. He was a soldier in the First World War, and he is on record, I think this was Dallas's quote here, as saying that Benighted is, quote, forms of post-war pessimism pretending to be people, unquote. Was that your quote, Dallas, or is
no,
something else?
But go for it.
Awesome. Okay, perfect.
No.
So you've got you can surprise us here in just a moment. But yes, AKA the characters in the novel are variations of what the British public was like during that time, post-World War and pre-Great Depression, because this was just 2 years before the Great Depression was going to start hitting and sinking everyone into its own a new crises to deal with all over again. Priestley was a few things about Priestley that I do think are actually kind of important to this particular novel. Priestley was married 3 times. He also had a number of affairs, including a serious relationship with the actress Peggy Ashcroft. Writing in 1972, Priestley described himself as quote unquote lusty, and as one who has quote enjoyed the physical relations with the sexes without the feelings of guilt which seemed to disturb some of my distinguished colleagues, unquote. In 1925, his first wife, Emily Pat Tempest, died of cancer, only 4 years into the marriage. Now, there's a major character in Benighted that has suffered the death of a wife and is really processing that emotion and that feeling. And he's out and about with other women at this point, and yet distant from them. It's like he's doing it, but his heart isn't into it. And I feel like this might have been J.B. Priestley really processing where he was with things, because he had already remarried by 1926. But that death of his first wife, and this character in the book also lost a wife to a disease. I can't remember if he said it was cancer in the book. I don't think they specify, but just that she died of something that seemed to be kind of natural causes. I know she died of I don't want to ruin the novel, but he thought it was how she was treated by his colleagues and things like that, and that she died of is kind of a broken heart or feeling like she wasn't good enough. So kind of like her emotional state was not great regardless. But here's the fun part. In September 1926, so 1 year after the death of his first wife, Priestley married Jane Wyndham Lewis, ex-wife of the one-time Beachcomber columnist D.B. Wyndham Lewis, no relation to the artist Wyndham Lewis, by the way. They had 2 daughters, including music therapist Mary Priestley, conceived in 1924, while Jane was still married to D.B. Wyndham Lewis and a year before his first wife died. So, yeah, this seemed to be a bit of a shtick with him. I think one of the things in this novel we're going to talk about is the love and sex themes that go on in this novel, which seemed very forward for 1927, frankly. But we'll get to that in just a moment. I will say, last thing about Priestley that's important to note, he was very left-leaning in his politics. He was socialist by nature, but he did distrust organized parties and political dogma. He was a socialist, but very anti-communist. He hated Stalin and all that Stalin stood for at the time. Priestley's name, however, was nevertheless put on Orwell's list, a list of people that George Orwell, the author, prepared in March 1949 for the Information Research Department, or the IRD, a propaganda unit set up by the Foreign Office by the Labor government. Orwell considered or suspected all the people on this list to have pro-communist leanings and therefore to be unsuitable to write for the IRD.
And curiously, go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I guess George Orwell wrote what he knew, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Curiously enough, about the socialist connections, There was a thing in the 57 called the Wolfenden Report, which published recommending partial decriminalization for homosexual men. And Tony Dyson, who was a literary critic, wrote some very famous criticism in the 50s and 60s. But he essentially had this sort of recommendation that he wanted to be enacted. And one of the leading dignitaries of the day who signed it was J.B. Priestley and his bisexual wife, Jaquetta Hawkes. And curiously enough, what's most interesting about it is apparently Priestley was a really strong supporter of homosexual rights. And there's quite a bit of information on him with sort of statements about his sort of experimentation with the sexes at large.
The sexes, plural.
At large. And even more curiously, apparently there's a great story here about his son coming out formally as a gay man and Priestley being extraordinarily disappointed. So apparently the message there is have your fun, but you don't need to formalize it. You don't need to shout it from the rooftops.
Don't cause trouble for the family name.
Exactly.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
So
keep it discreet, like me, son. I'm so disappointed in you. You learn nothing from me. Yeah.
Precisely.
Well, thus endeth the history lesson. So Dallas, I'm going to turn it back over to you for that quote that we didn't get yet.
Actually, I'm gonna save that quote for the end. I'm glad you cut me off. Actually,
okay.
It's more impactful at the end.
Okay, so
I
will say that. So this is where we usually say, "What is your history with this book and whatnot?" So for me, I'm the one who picked this book for our first book. I picked it for a number of reasons. I had purchased a copy of it not too long ago. Now, one of the reasons why most people are not going to be familiar with this book outside of the movie is it was out of print for decades.
For sure.
And you could, you had to really hunt down like an old copy. Maybe it was affordable, but it was not on bookshelves. It was not being promoted. It was not, easily accessible per se. So Valancourt Books recently, I think in 2013, finally put out a new edition. First off, this cover is just awesome. God, do I love this cover so much. This is the OG. They reproduced the cover of the OG UK edition. And whoever the artist is who did this cover, it's lost to time. No one knows. There's no credit on this. He signed it or she signed it, M.O.B. And I've deep dived the internet and there's nothing on this artist. So it is lost to time. If anyone wants that challenge, look up the Valancourt edition of Benighted, which is the same cover that was on the Heinemann original 1927 edition in the UK, and see if you can track down this artist, because I love the artwork. It's simple, but so fucking good. So I would love to know who that is. But Valancourt has been putting out J.B. Priestley novels once again. They put out about probably like half of them at this point. And Benighted was one of the first, because it was one of his first novels. And when this hit Amazon many years ago, I bought it, sight unseen. I was like, yeah, all right, I want to do it. So I did, and it just sat on my bookshelf for many years, unread, untouched. And when we were ready to finally do our first novel, me and Dallas, I used to read voraciously, like prose, read voraciously. And I think me and Dallas have both fallen off that horse pretty hard in recent years because we got so busy with so many other things. And I knew we needed to baby step back into the discipline of being able to read something prose wise and commit to that time and make sure we're reading every day and getting X number of pages done a week. So I was like, look, a 150 page novel is where we need to start. That's going to be our baby step into this. And we're going to make sure we can do that. And then we're going to get on to thicker and bigger books. Benighted, and then when I saw Benighted sitting on the shelf, I'm like, I've been so curious about this book. I didn't really know what it was. I'd never heard of J.B. Priestley. I loved the title. I loved the cover. And I was like, let's do it. It's the right size. It's been sitting on my bookshelf languishing for a long, long time. So by dint of those reasons, I chose it. I'm really glad I did. I enjoyed this a shit ton. But Dallas, any history whatsoever with this book?
Well, curiously, I'd seen the film first. And there was a J.B. Priestley play, which I read years ago, and I actually can't even remember which one And so I was
They did do a play of this, The Old Dark House, well after his death. I think it's only like 10 years old or something like that.
Interesting. So yeah, I remember years ago, decades ago, probably mid-90s, reading a play, a J.B. Priestley play. And even that had sort of smatterings of sort of homosexuality and sort of alternative lifestyle. Apparently that's a
Interesting.
recurring kind of theme in some of his work. And when you suggested this book, I do recall coming across an audio book, radio play of this.
Oh, okay.
And not
Yeah,
having
that makes
listened
sense.
to it. It was one of those things where I was like, oh, this is very interesting. And so I, added it to the list, the to-do list, the reading list, so to speak, the listening list. And so after I got a copy of this for this podcast, I went back and listened to the audio book, the audio radio play, and, after reading the book. And I got to say, they do a fantastic job on this radio play. It is just moody and dark, and
Good.
It's
the book is.
The book is
The
so,
book
it's
totally
so dark.
is.
But what's amazing about hearing it in audio format, because not all books make great radio plays or audio format, they just don't.
Yeah.
And of course, this being sort of Gothic parallel, it definitely lends itself to that. And they really did a phenomenal fucking job of amping up that oral or auditory creep factor. And so reading the book first and then listening to the radio play, I gotta say, sometimes that's the way to go, because it really it really made it sing for me. So yeah, long story short, I was familiar with Priestley prior to this, and the book to a certain degree, having not read it. I'm glad we put it on the list. It's kind of fantastic. One more bit of trivia here. Another film which I've seen, which I recommend you see, Dave, that is inspired loosely by this short story, is a film called, oh God, what was the name? Thundercrack. Thundercrack. It is.
All right. That sounds like porn, but okay.
It's not porn. It's 1975, so it's 1975, so it's cult film status. I suppose you could call him an
yes, combining an old dark house mystery with hardcore sex scenes. Okay,
yeah,
it is porn.
Yeah,
shit.
It's porn. It's porn adjacent. You can't call it porn. It's porn
for the 70s. No. If Deep Throat and
Deep Throat wasn't porn then. Deep Throat became porn after the fact.
It totally
Deep Throat became porn after the fact.
It is porn. It's just there was an era where porn was released in actual cinemas.
Exactly, but it wasn't.
Yes.
But I will say
it was.
McDowell, no, absolutely not. McDowell was a counterculture performance artist. He came out of San Francisco, I think. I don't know if he was born there, but he came out of San Francisco. I believe he died.
Sorry, I have so much porn on the brain now. I thought you just said, I don't know if there's porn there, but San Francisco. and I was like, yeah, there was probably porn there. Pretty sure there's porn everywhere.
Now, the titles of some of his other great masterworks are Beaver Fever, Peed into the Wind, and Confessions.
But not porn.
Nope,
but not porn.
Absolutely not.
Nope, not
Absolutely
porn.
Thundercrack, people. So please,
Thundercrack is his. Wow. So that is his subtlest title that he ever came up with.
That's his magnum opus. So yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Somebody check that out and let us know. Give us a brief review on the sites there. Anyhow.
Oh! You like how Dallas is like, it's not porn, but we're not watching it.
I'm definitely watching it again. I've seen it.
Okay. All right, because you're like, report back. You guys go watch it. It's like, don't make us watch it, for fuck's sake. Just tell us how it is. All right. So, all right, cool. So neither of us had read the book before.
Right.
I did. And then after reading the book, I watched the movie. I do recommend, it's hard. Like, do you watch the movie? Do you read the book first? That is always one of the hard questions out there, where I will say I probably would have liked the movie more if I hadn't read the book first, because the book is superior in many ways, at least in terms of substance and really just these characters are very rich in the novel, and they're not in the movie. They are caricatures in the movie. They are they each have one exact note, and they're like, that's my note. That's what I'm doing here. And the movie has moments where they get dimensions, but the movie moves so fast, and you're not getting the reasons for why they're suddenly becoming dimensional, that the moments just kind of happen, and you're like, oh, okay. That's it. If I had watched the movie first, I would have been like, oh, these are some cool moments, right? Where you're just sort of like, oh, I wasn't expecting someone to be this, like, to have this moment where they're not just their one note. They're more than that. Cool. Good on you, movie. But having read the novel and watched the movie, I'm like, could you have set that up better? You know, it's like now you're suddenly kind of critical because the book is richer. But at the same time, books take a lot longer to consume. Even a 150-page book, you're going to be spending more time with that than you are going to be with the movie. So should you watch a movie that is 90% exactly what the book is in terms of plot and plot beats and even character beats? They are pretty much the same thing. I would say read the novel first, just because it's so much, like, it'll surprise you more. You really don't know where this book is going, and I think that's part of its joy. I think the movie's kind of the same way, where you're just sort of like, but the movie moves so fast, you don't have time to really think about it too long before you're like, oh, this is where we're going. Okay, great. Whereas the book, it's so slow burn.
Yeah.
They arrive at this castle in pieces, one group, then a second group, and then the inhabitants of the castle themselves. I say castle. It's a manor. It's a house.
Manor.
It's a big house.
It's a house on a hill. Yeah.
So everyone arrives here. It is a storm of the century kind of a thing. We'll say storm of a decade, because obviously century is a very long time. This was only 1927, but it was a storm that, like, it flooded the roads. It was landslide, and this was the countryside of Britain. Landslides were happening, rock slides, mudslides. So the roads were getting buried and covered. So, like I said earlier, like a bridge getting washed out. Like, this was a classic old dark house trope where it's like the weather forced you off the roads. These were the early days of cars. So, you know, these cars were not the most robust or able to weather this kind of terrain. One of the fun things in the book, I couldn't quite picture it. I had to watch the movie to see this, because they kept talking about how they're in the car, but they're so wet.
Yeah.
Even in the car.
Yeah.
And I was like, right, it's an old car. But I kept trying to picture exactly how the water was getting in, even in an old car. And it took watching the movie, where it's just sort of, it's got kind of like a canvasy sort of top that the water's leaking through. There aren't really there's no windows to roll up.
Right.
It's just open. And so you're like, oh.
Yeah, they were motorized carriages at that point. Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, that's not a good car. You know, like, by modern standards, I'm like, shit, you're open to the elements there, man. Yeah. So the car was not shelter in that regard, and they couldn't treat it as shelter. So they had to get off the road and go to this mansion, and take shelter there. And then the inhabitants are all very weird, quirky old folks. And then a very quote unquote brutish manservant who was dumb in the sense of not being able to speak.
Called Morgan,
so he was
by
mute.
the way.
Called Morgan,
and
played by Boris Karloff in the movie.
And if anyone is aware of the concept in Welsh mythos, I think it's Welsh, of Morgan Le Fay, which is essentially sort of the idea of an assistant or a pleasant sort of character who transforms over time to something a bit more sinister.
I feel like he was not pleasant to begin with, though, in this book.
He was innocuous to begin with. He was sort of neutral to begin with. He definitely evolves. But
the only thing I will say is everyone was still kind of scared of him right from the get-go.
Oh, he's described as a large lump of man with a black, full beard, matted hair, and a low forehead.
That when he tried to speak would just do this like strangled gargle of a sound, and so people were just like, you didn't know
exactly. It's Lurch, it's Frankenstein, it's the monster, the innocuous kind of monster.
And so most of this novel, and this is the fun part of the novel for me, I think, is it really is just these characters in this house dealing with the weird inhabitants. There's Morgan. There's this old couple, brother, sister, that kind of run the place. They mention there's
The femme.
a master of the house who's upstairs somewhere. Sir Roderick or Sir Robert. Now I'm forgetting exactly what his name was.
Yeah.
Roger, Sir Roger, Sir R something that was very British. That's up there, and you don't see him for the longest time, but he's up there somewhere. And everything about these characters seem off, but not in an alarming way,
Right.
just in an off. They're weird. But then, the characters are like, well, they're stuck out here in the country. They're country bumpkins for the most. It's a big house, but it's a country bumpkin big house. Right. And this is, again, post-war. So, like, modernization is really trickling in and seeping into British public, but American public too, everywhere. Modernization was happening. And so a big part of the push and pull of this novel is that the people living with barely any electricity that are mostly, the storm is going to cut that out. They're far away from the rest of civilization. They don't interact with people very often. And so are very awkward and clumsy with it and weird and eccentric. And here are the civilized people trying to take shelter here who have all these mores and ways of communicating that are very quote unquote civilized, but breaks down a little bit when you're talking to people that don't play that game on a daily basis. And so they're just sort of like, what do we do with each other? And how do we, but for the most part, they're like, look, it's one night. We're just here to like shelter from the storm. So everyone's taking it pretty cool. They're a little weirded out. Some of them get freaked out now and again, whether with Morgan, the sister of the older couple, the lady is almost half deaf. And so she screams all the time. Rebecca Femme. These are the Femmes. And I do kind of love that word, right?
It's a great name. Again, it's one of those weird like names.
And it's just F-E-M-M, by the way. It's not F-E-M-M-E, right? So they're like, this was not the word that became like feminism and you're a femme or effeminate. They're just F-E-M-M, so femme.
Although, hold on. There is a butch femme dynamic between Rebecca's masculinity and Horace's
100%.
femininity.
100%.
Like, it's a real thing.
Yes. And I was going to say, when you were talking about J.B. Priestley's possible bisexual tendencies and his support for homosexuality and everything, there's one more character we haven't mentioned that kind of appears at the very end that Morgan, the big brutish guy, is very protective of and very into. And now that we're talking about sort of the homosexual undertones and themes, I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, now I'm seeing that. Now I'm seeing that I almost said hardcore. Now I'm seeing that very, very, nope, firmly doesn't work either. Damn it. There's no good words for this. Now I'm seeing that very much. So I'll just say that. Leave it at that.
Although now it's easier to see how we get from this piece to Thundercrack.
Yes. I think so. And Rocky Horror, too, for that matter, right?
Absolutely.
It's like, yeah. I think the Femmes are, in terms of masculinity and femininity, the brother-sister are a little reversed. And one is very powerful and acts like she runs the place, and the other one is very just kind of is very in the background. He's forced to be presentational as a host, like a woman would, right? Or it's sort of like, especially for that time, where it's like, you're the hostess, like be out there and be pretty, but don't say too much, and you're not in charge, right, of anything. And the Mr. Femme is very much that character where he's just kind of along for the ride. He and this, now they are siblings, so they do give each other shit both ways. They're both old siblings that you can tell mostly don't like each other anymore, if they ever did. Very critical of each other, very critical of each other's ways of doing things and beliefs. It's a quirky batch of characters, and a second group of characters. Two more people show up that also take shelter, and then you have a full group, and they're all bouncing off each other. I think the part where the novel really took off for me, and where these characters really came alive, is when they do the truth. It's kind of truth or dare, but no dare. It's just truth, right? Where they go around the table, and everyone has to ask the question of the person next to them. Any question, and the person next to them must answer truthfully, but then they in turn get to ask a question of the person on their next side, and then that person has to answer truthfully. And so you go around the table and get some nice insight, and that was a brilliant.
That's a great scene. That's a great scene. just in
and
general.
a way to force your characters to not just in their heads thinking about their past. They're not flashbacks. They have to tell something about themselves that they would not do in strange company like this if it wasn't for this game. And I'm like, good, this is cool.
Yeah.
And you do. So the other thing I really love about this novel is that all these characters have an arc, like every single one of them. Arcs, like in the entire ensemble, starts as one thing and ends as something at least a little different, if not wildly different, by the time this novel is over.
I think that's
and you're
why
so
it's lauded so much and so deeply, because that's sort of a central tenet of just storytelling in general is the character arc. And when you have this cast of 12? No, probably less than 12. 10 I guess, 10ish.
Right.
People, and each character has an identifiable arc. Which just sings. It just
that is their own.
That
isn't
purely
even
their own.
Connected, right? And the arcs aren't even directly connected to the main through line, the main old dark house horror element of the book, or thriller element of the book. I think people could quibble whether this is a thriller or a horror. It does straddle that line. And the thing that makes it a spooky old dark house story isn't even the thing that pushes most of these people. They're being pushed just by bouncing off each other and being where they are in life. Right. I think this is where the book is so superior to the movie, is that the movie pays a lot of that very short shrift. Like you're not, you don't notice the arcs between a lot of the characters, only maybe one or two. And in the book, it's crystal clear. Everyone's going through an arc. And that arc is solid and meaningful and well done and presented in a way that you buy it wholeheartedly and makes these characters really rich. The themes of the book and what it's really exploring between these different characters are very rich. The way they interact with each other feels very real, and feels like it's not pat. It's not just, we need an arc, so this is what's going to happen. Like nothing seems particularly plot driven.
One thing,
it's very, very good.
One thing I really, really enjoy just as a writer was his ability to take, for lack of a better term, the dialogue between characters and remove pretense. It's like he's just removed all pretense. When the characters arrive at the door, there is that initial kind of, could you guys offer us some shelter? And that sort of, that pretentious kind of thing. But the femmes at home are just sort of like, yeah, okay, whatever. And they're just so indifferent to the arrival of these individuals. And then when the characters are interacting around the table, there's just no pretense. Characters, are able to kind of be really just, honest, which again, I think there are literary critics who would look at that and say, okay, that's a bit forced. But in the context of this story, I mean, it's Gothic. It's a little elevated. So it works, and it is really satisfying. And as a person who gets a little too crafty sometime in his writing with the connections of characters, it was really good to see someone just remove all of the pretense and have characters kind of say what they feel.
This is actually a bit of a what a lot of advice on writing says that this breaks a rule that you shouldn't break. But I think this novel does it in a way that is so organic and so natural that it works perfectly well, which is, you have to pick a POV and stick to that POV. Right. And a lot of books will maybe do something where each chapter will switch the POV. And this book does that. Like it will stick to a POV sometimes largely in each chapter. But it has no problem when it wants to and thinks it deems it best to be like, say there are two characters, husband and wife, and the book really wants to explore what's going on between them, both before and during this scene, like, before they arrived at this house and now how that's being processed with what's happening in this house. And let's say it picked the POV of the wife to start the chapter. Right. But at one point, she'll be thinking something about the husband and being like, oh, he's doing this and that's what he does when this type of thing is happening. And it will, for a paragraph or two, jump over to his head. And you'll see the reflected version of that, where he's looking back at the wife and thinking his thoughts on that. And they pair so magically together. Then it will jump back to the wife and then continue going forward with the wife as it started that chapter. But it will jump from POV to POV and get into the heads of different characters to make a matchup of thoughts in a way that forms a picture where you're like, damn, you're used to novels being more coy about this
Mhm.
shit, and this novel really isn't. It's like, no, I want you to know these people. I want you to know who they are and what they're doing and what they're processing in this moment. And in a way, J.B. Priestley does do it in a way where it's not boring. It's not just him, because they say show don't tell. But in this
Exactly.
case, the way he's telling it is so narrative
Right.
that it's okay.
Right.
You and from a character POV standpoint, that it's okay. You're getting it from their thoughts, and so like thought bubbles in comics almost. It's like half this book is thought bubbles.
Precisely.
But the thought bubbles are so interesting and well structured, and the way he matches them together and cuts between them, that it works.
And it's so crazy you say that, because the entire time reading this thing, I kept thinking, okay, this reads like a graphic novel. It reads like a fucking graphic novel. Because of that, because of the idea that these characters break sort of, the writing breaks traditional rules, because the characters speak overtly, because you have insight into what they're feeling or thinking about a person sitting across from them. So it does kind of lend itself to the graphic novel format because of that, which I think might be part of the reason it was such an easy read. It is.
It flows.
It flows.
Yeah.
It flows.
The other thing I'll mention about this book, there are 2 love stories going on within it. One that is sort of a rekindling of a love, and the other one that is a newfound love. And both love stories, are also like, there's something very real about both. He wrote about how people meeting each other for the first time fall in love in a way that seemed absolutely accurate and absolutely like, yeah, this is the excitement and electricity of that. And you're like, okay, this is, we talked about Carly Rae Jepsen's Call Me Maybe.
Oh, God. You found a way to work in Carly Rae Jepsen to goddamn episode about a book.
Everything. David, shut up. Shut up about Carly Rae Jepsen. So, but that whole thing of like, that pit where you're like, this is crazy. But I think, and especially back for 1927, they had to almost speak in terms of like, I want to get married to you on, day one. Right. But it's like, but it is that feeling of like, I think I fucking do. Like, that's nuts. But I think I do. Like you, like, what is this? At one point, they even have a thought where it's like, they're not even the most attractive person in the world, but what is this? This is like, but this is something much better than that, even greater than that. And it's not like they're not attracted to the person. So they're, it's not something where they're like, oh, well, I do like their personality. There's more to it than that, but there's that. And then there is an already married couple. And one thing I give the novel credit for, it never reveals why their love is falling apart when the novel begins. I kept expecting the backstory of that, like there would be some event. And I think the point of the novel is like, there was no event. There was no thing that caused it. They just were drifting, and they were falling out of love in that slow, entropic way that relationships sometimes do. And the events of this night and the way they understood each other and the way they started to look at each other again, it was one of the, and kind of the moral was like, oh, we just have to try sometimes. Like, not always, but some, and I think there's even a moment in the book where the writing is even, it doesn't have to be hard all the time, but sometimes it's okay for it to be hard. Like, sometimes it's okay for it to be work and for it to be a struggle. But that is the point. When those moments happen, you have to work and to make it happen, and then you'll get to that other side. So it had this beautiful POV, or it had a beautiful understanding of both versions, both ends of the spectrum of love, like the beginning and well into it. And what it takes to rekindle that and to get it there. So the book, it's a double love story. It's a gothic romance.
It also does, if there are any writers, sorry, Dave, did I cut you off? Go ahead.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
For any writers out there, creators, if you are interested in what it means to be media res, to be dropped into a world that is already moving uphill or downhill, so to speak, this does a fantastic job of just dropping you right into the flow of things, so that the inertia, the momentum, the energy is already there. It is just so visceral and so interesting. I do think a lot of the heavy lifting is done by the sort of Gothic framework he's established. It was a dark and
Yep.
stormy night. That does do a lot of the initial work, at least. But it really is kind of a bit of a masterclass on how to drop into a world, get interesting, find different angles, break some rules, make it creepy. You got a love story in there. Again, my favorite character, I'm going to be rambling here for a second, is Morgan, just because he's the most interesting character in the entire thing for me. I mean, the characters are great. They're great. They're great. But because everyone else has a reaction to him, a number of reactions to him, it makes story a bit more interesting.
He is the one we learn the least about.
Precisely.
Yes.
Precisely.
He remains a cipher.
Right.
Yeah.
Which might just be more of a testament to my sort of habits as a reader and an artist. But I tend to like those characters who remain a bit mysterious and unresolved.
Right.
Anyway.
All right. So the last thing I'll say about this novel, this is a thriller novel in the ultimate end. There is a thriller element, even though by about page 100 out of 150, like I was like, okay, nothing's going to happen in this novel. I love it, but nothing's going to be happening in this novel.
Right.
But then it does get there. So just keep going, go along for the ride. It's a fun one. It's great. All right.
That out again.
So wine pairings, with Benighted by J.B. Priestley. This will be for the novel, not necessarily for the movies.
Correct.
We will, if and when we hit the movies, we will hit the movies. But for this is going to be the version of the novel, because the novel is stylistically and tonally and from an aesthetically, it is distinct from the film.
Absolutely.
Whereas the film has its own flavor. Some people call it more comedy. I just call it more frantic, more movie, where it's like, we're going to lose the audience. We're going to lose the audience. Move. Keep going.
Right.
And so it does wind up with a little bit. The movie's honestly quite good. So I highly recommend it. But if you can slow yourself down to read the novel first, do that. You might be one of those people, though, where it's like, well, I want to enjoy both. So I'll watch the movie first, really like it, then read the novel and like it even more. Then you like both rather than going vice versa, which is fair. That may be accurate. Like I said, I would have liked the movie even better probably if I saw it first. But I also want the novel to be the surprising part, because it is, you're committing more time to that. Okay. Right. So I went first last time, Dallas. So you go first this time.
So, okay, I'm easy to please in certain ways, in very, very small places in my life, and one of those places is anything that begins with anything similar to "It was a dark and stormy night." I'm in. It's probably going to satisfy me just in terms of the novelty. So. I knew I wanted a red wine. I knew I wanted something that I was familiar with, because I'm very familiar with the sort of world that he's crafted, the narratives. In terms of the grape, I wanted to go with something that was used very often in blending and very popular, I suppose. So I knew I wanted the cornerstone to be a Cab Sauv, and with the Cab Sauvs. You can find great blends with Merlot, Cab Francs. I went with a Bordeaux, just because, again, it mirrors the idea that this is a very accessible, well-known, well sort of healed world and themes. And I actually have had at least 3 or 4 of these vintages before from this particular vineyard. And this blend itself is a Merlot. I know, I'm not a huge fan of Merlot, but it blends well in this. Cab Sauv, Cab Franc. This is the Chateau L'Aubespin, Les Moulins. It is Medoc 2018. And I can't express how easy drinking this wine is. Just like this story. just
Right.
like this.
I was going to
world.
say it's a very everyday Bordeaux type of a
Exactly.
thing, especially for an imported Bordeaux.
Exactly.
Like I don't know if they drink it over there, but we drink it over here. Like
Yeah.
that is an easy one to find.
It is
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
very easy one to find. It is really satisfying. It holds well. Like I mean, I enjoy. This is gonna piss off a lot of wine drinkers, but I enjoy opening this bottle, having a glass, and leaving it on the counter open for a day. That is insane.
Yep.
I know, but
Not really.
it just does something to this wine
Mhm.
and this
It
story.
opens it up.
It really does. And what Priestley does with this story is it is the kind of thing, like you said, it's kind of an everyday reader. It really is. If you're
Mhm.
looking for a story that it's going to take you 2 days because you want to put your phone down, you don't want to look at television, you don't want to hear any music, you just want to deep dive into some really satisfying story, satisfying tale that had some interesting twists and turns but wasn't too out there, it's going to be this guy. So yeah, that's my pairing. It's the
Beautiful.
2018. Yeah,
2018. All right, and say the name of it one more time.
this is the Chateau L'Aubespin. It is the Les Moulins, or Les Moulins, as
Les Moulins.
my
Yeah.
pretentious French friend says.
Sweet. So I went a different direction. I agree with that pairing. I think that'd be great. I'll have to try just an everyday Bordeaux with. I mean, I've already read the novel, but just thinking about the novel in my head,
Right.
and going with that. But so I went a little outside the wine world for this one. Now I was very tempted to try and find a gin, because that's what they were stuck drinking in most of
That's
the book.
true. That was my first
right?
thought too. And I'm a gin guy. Like so
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. But it was straight gin.
Yeah.
So
Right. It was
they were
straight
like,
rough house
all
gin.
we have is gin.
Yeah.
Right. They're like, all we have is gin.
We use this to
And
drink
the-
and
you know-
clear wounds with,
Right. But this is post-war Britain, so it's so funny because all the characters are like, "I love gin.
Yeah.
This is good gin," and they're straight drinking it, and I'm just like, "Woohoo!" I'm like, "Okay, I don't like gin that much, guys.
Right.
I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm going to go there." And to be fair, they liked gin, but they also didn't have any choice. And then at one point, I don't know if it was whiskey or scotch, but one of the characters had bought a flask stashed in a car outside and went to go get that. So these were the booze. There was no wine in this book, unfortunately. I wish there was, but there was not. But instead, I decided, look, it's not going to be gin. I don't think gin pairs with this book, really. It could do in a pinch. But this book it's charming. Those love stories are so well done. There's a lightness to it while also being heavy and atmospheric and oppressive in its other way. And then, of course, it veers towards the dark side in its final act. So it had a lot going on there that gin would work in a pinch, but it wasn't like a match.
Yeah.
And what I tried to really think about is a lot of this book are these people sitting around a fire just dealing with shit and talking to each other. And they have a meal, but then most of it is post-meal. So I'm like, what about an aperitif, a digestive, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, that's where I think I really wanted to go. Something a little heavier.
All right.
So something higher in alcohol.
Yeah.
Something that is going to this is what I would sip around that fire. This is what they would sip around that fire if they had it.
Yeah.
And I even went a little far. Now, this story. It's charming, but it has a bitter side to it, right?
There's
it's
a bite.
bittersweet.
Yeah.
Yes. And even with the way it ends, bittersweet is the right way to think about it. It's not just sweet. It's not just charming. It's not just dark and monstrous and horror-driven, horror-filled. So bittersweet is the best word I could think of it. And this is late at night. No one's getting any sleep. Everyone's staying up all night. So I had this bottle of Caffé Amaro.
Nice.
All right.
Amaro.
Now Amaro is it means bitter in Italian. And it is now there is Amaro out there that is grape based, so it is kind of sort of wine based. This is not. This is corn based liqueur, but it is cold brew coffee has been added to it. So this is a one of a kind take on coffee liqueurs. And this is by J. Reiger and Company, Jrieger, Jay Reiger. You can find this. This is out there. I got this at a wine shop, but yeah, like Total Wine carries it, Bevmo carries it, so like it's out there. It's got a pretty good distribution. It is a bittersweet coffee liqueur. Amaro is a category of liqueur characterized by its bitter, herbal, and slightly sweet flavor, which stems from the use of botanicals, herbs, and cane syrup. So this one in particular was rated 92 points by the esteemed Ultimate Spirits Challenge. And Caffé Amaro is a collaboration with the Kansas-based coffee roasters called Thou Mayest. Thou Mayest select a single origin coffee roast that is then utilized to contribute to the flavors of that the botanicals generate. And this Caffé Amaro spends a brief amount of time in a whiskey barrel after all of that, resulting in a rich, bittersweet flavor that works great in cocktails or, for me, can be enjoyed by itself over some ice as a meal. Either refrigerate it and just pour it straight. Oh yeah, 1 or 2 ice cubes and just let it sit in there, because it'll be, the first couple sips will be very powerful, and then it gets just a tiny diluted as it goes. Don't pour so much that it's going to dilute, but like small aperitif glass, 1 ice cube sometimes if it's a big ice cube, 2 if they're small. This is 31% alcohol, so 62 proof.
I might have to try that. Heat it a little bit the first time, actually. A little warm.
Just because of the coffee?
Yeah.
It's cold brew coffee now, though. It's meant to be cold. Yeah. It's meant that, like, because even the coffee part is that cold brew concentrated version where it's meant to be cut with that ice. That's why you make a cold brew. And then the botanicals involved are juniper berries, cardamom, orange peel, star anise, spearmint leaves, gentian root, and vanilla beans.
Juniper berries, guys, if you're familiar with gin, that generally is it gives you the bite you get from most gins.
Yes. And this one was a Sumatra coffee that was used in the current vintage that is out and about. And every full bottle of this contains a little bit less than the equivalent of 5 hot drip cups of coffee. So not a ton. Like when you think about this whole bottle and you're taking little aperitif versions, it's not a ton. But I will say this, if it is late at night, because I was mostly reading this late at night, if you really are worried about the cold brew coffee part at like 10 at night or however late it is, just get an Amaro. Yeah. Don't worry about the cafe part. I just thought, this is a sleepless night kind of book. It's all about people that are sleepless and are trying to stay up desperately. They don't, there are no beds in this house. They say that out front. They're like, no beds. No beds. And they're like, look, we'll entertain each other. We'll stay up all night. It's all good. So this is a coffee and Amaro type of book.
All right. I'm going to try that out, actually. That sounds interesting. I generally am not I am not a coffee liqueur guy in any, to any degree, but that actually sounds interesting. I may try that.
So that has been John Boynton or J.B. Priestley's Benighted.
That's right.
Best title. Awesome cover art. Go look up the Valancourt paperback, which is now out and about everywhere. Yeah. And then they have many more J.B. Priestley novels that they've brought back into print. I'm going to check out at least a few. Doomsday Men is one. Magicians is another. Both look amazing.
And he had quite a few screenplays, which were taken to film.
And he had quite a few screenplays.
And I will also recommend that audiobook, a radio play, which if I don't have it.
Yeah.
The title.
Old Dark House radio play. Yeah. Go try and look that up as well. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Amazing. All right, folks. This has been Wine And. We will be back next week for another Wine and Entertainment pairing for your entertainment.
All right.
We will see you then.
And
ciao, ciao.
Real quick, someone go out and find a copy of not Thundercock. What is it? Thundercrack. That's
Crack.
it. Different movie. Oopsie. Thundercrack, and let us know.
Sorry, I've had an image of a butt crack ever since that title came, so I'm never gonna forget it. That's why I was like, yeah, it sounds like fun. I'm like, all I can see is a butt now. I'm sorry, Thundercrack.
All right.
There we go.
Later, guys.
You could call other things Thundercrack on the human body.
True.
So this is true. Yeah, absolutely.
Very true.
All right, so anyone's Thundercrack, they're probably all featured in this movie. Is my guess. Right. So, all right. Ciao for now, folks. We will catch you next week. And good night.
Later, guys.